Hello everyone, welcome to another video. I'm looking at this Intel NUC today. It is the NUC 6 i7 KYK, also known as the Skull Canyon, which is a bit of a silly name because the whole range of CPUs was called Skull Canyon, and that's why it's got a skull on it. Though they continue to use this design going forward, so it kind of means nothing after this point. As with all NUCs, this is a bare bones, as in it only came with the computer itself, and no RAM, no SSDs or anything like that. It comes with an i7 6770HQ. The only difference between that one and the 6700 is this one comes with the Iris Pro graphics rather than standard HD graphics. Does it make that much difference? Not really, but we'll get on to that in a minute. This originally cost round about £600-700, but I picked it up for around £500 a year later. So it was a bit of a bargain because I didn't want to use this for gaming anyway. I wanted to use this for a server, because it's one of the very few NUCs that actually officially supports Windows Server. I don't use it for that anymore because I have no need for Windows Server. Now that brings it onto the strange target market of this machine. Look on the back of the box. Change the game. Whatever that means. So for some reason it was aimed at esports kind of thing. So it was aimed at esports and things like that. So as you can see here, for gameplay and powerful workloads. Not strictly true, I don't think. Even then, and most certainly now. Came with Toslink for some reason, which is a bit weird. And a firmly optimized chassis. And that was also nonsense as well. So while this was targeted at gamers, anything above 720p was not going to happen. And even the current games at the back end of 2016 and the start of 2017 were going to struggle on this. But where did the advantage of this thing lie anyway? It's really the fact that it's small form factor. I mean, as you can see, it's about the size of my hand. Low power consumption. It uses about 19 watts at idle. At full load, unfortunately, it uses about 77 watts, which is a bit ridiculous. Which means, shockingly enough, it gets a bit hot. It's only got a tiny little fan here, and it gets to about 100 degrees under full load, and it will just sit there with the fan going at full speed, so it gets very loud and very hot. At which point it does throttle itself down, which kind of destroys the point of using this for gaming. Anyway, what else do you get in the box very quick? Well, you get a power cable. It's the UK version, so you get UK power plug. Of course, you get a little i7 sticker. I'm grateful they didn't stick it on beforehand. And you get a few little screws, some risers for the SSD, and an Allen key. The Allen key is for changing this top bit here. So it does come with a non-gaming version with no skull on it. So if that's more your thing, you can use it for that. Also nicely comes with a, which I forgot to put back in the box, a nice mount to stick on the back of the monitor, so that's always useful. But other than that, not much else in the box. So interestingly, under here there are some headers where you can attach stuff like USB 2, and there are, for lack of a better term, like hats that go on top that can add functionality. I don't think any were officially released, but the pinout was available, and certain companies did use this area to add extra things here. Quite useful if you want to install Windows 7, because the USB 2 basically reduces makes it easier to install Windows 7. So the configuration is today has only got 16 gig of RAM, which isn't ideal, but it's what I'll be using. I haven't got 32 gig to put in here at the moment, and I don't think it's going to make a massive amount of difference regardless. So let's go plug it in and let's go have a look at how things perform. But first, can it run Windows 11? Well, if you haven't already guessed already, the CPU is too low. though you can unofficially run it with a little tweak in the registry of Windows 10, but it doesn't support TPM at all, version 1.2 or version 2. So there's no chance of this machine ever running Windows 11. So it's stuck on Windows 10 or Linux. So that's not a terrible thing. It just means that there is a sell-by date on this machine of 2025. So there's no point buying one if you intend to run Windows 11. Well, how about CPU performance then? Since it's a mobile i7, it lands around about a Sandy Bridge i7, so the 2700K. Not great, but not terrible at the same time. In Cinebench R23, we get a reasonable score of 3860, which isn't terrible. And in PC Mark 10, we score 3603, which once again isn't terrible at all. So for an office machine, this is perfectly fine. Well, how about gaming? So let's start with 3D Mark as always. In Time Spy, we score 865, which is between the GT710 and the GT1030, so pretty slow. In Firestrike, we score 840, but I had some issues with that, so I had to run it on custom, so that's why it's so low. In Night Raid, we score a decent score, once again between the GT710 and the GT1030, and it's a similar story with Wildlife, sitting in between those two cards. Now, while they do look pretty awful compared to higher up cards, this is onboard. And as you can see, it does perform better than Skylake's standard HD graphics and better than GT710, but it just can't get up to that level of the dedicated card of GT1030, so it's not great. And as you can see here in Final Fantasy XV, this is run at 720p. The GT1030 actually runs this okay. It's not great, but it's a much higher frame rate at 1080p. So as you can see, even though in benchmarks it does okay, in a more realistic benchmark like here, as you can see, it's really struggling. The CPU doesn't help much though. Now here we have the Final Fantasy XIV benchmark. This performed better than I expected. It's getting around about 30 FPS throughout at 1080p, which is pretty good, and the benchmark says it's playable. As you can see, it sits around about between the GT710 and the GT1030 again, much closer to what you'd expect from the benchmarks, so that's pretty impressive. So you could actually play something like Final Fantasy XIV on this machine, which isn't massively surprising because this was advertised as one of the games that could run on this system. Now let's look at something slightly more modern. This is Fortnite. Everyone always asks for this game, so let's look at it. This is running at medium at 66% resolution, and it's at the 1080p. And as you can see, we're getting around about an average of 32, but that's not great because there are dips into low 10s and teens, and it seems to be at the worst possible time, so it can't really run uncapped. As you can see, the CPU is getting a bit hot and is only running at about 1.4 gigahertz, which is below its base clock speed. Now let's try this on low at 100% resolution with a 30% cap. As you can see here, the CPU is not getting stressed at all. It's running at 3 GHz, no problem. And you're getting the average around about 27 FPS at the moment, but it seems to hold 30 FPS quite well. You get a few dips down into the teens here and there, but it's only very rarely, so it's much more playable on low. And you get the nice 100% resolution, so everything's a bit more crisp, even if it doesn't look great. So it's probably more playable on the low setting than it is on medium. So Fortnite is playable just about on this system. Now sticking with the theme of Battle Royale, let's have a look at Apex Legends. This game, I had real issues getting to run. As you can see here, it just seems to just crash and hang for no reason. And I had to put the settings down to the lowest possible setting that was available and adaptive resolution, and as you can see here, it is absolutely terrible. The resolution is incredibly low, even at 720p. I don't know what it's running at, 480p or even lower than that. And as you can see, the frame rate is struggling. It's 25 average, but realistically with the amount of dips, it really isn't. And with the resolution, you cannot see the enemies at all. So absolutely impossible to play Apex Legends on this system. Now let's look at a game that was designed or was targeted to run on this machine, according to Intel. So running on low at 720p, and yeah, okay, it is playable. We're getting round about an average of 53 FPS, touching the 60s here and there. So yes, Doom 2016 is playable at 720p, if that's how you want to play it. At 1080p, you got about 30 FPS average, which isn't ideal, but yeah, this machine can actually play a reasonably intense game at 720p. So you're not a complete loss of things to play on this computer. Now let's look at something a little bit newer. This is Strange Brigade running at 720p on low, and once again we are hitting a playable frame rate. Not 60 FPS of course, but we're getting an average of 48, which is more than playable for this game, if I'm honest. And it's a fun game to play, so that's great. Once again, the CPU is, for whatever reason, getting throttled, but it doesn't seem to affect the gameplay because it is GPU limited. But I think 2018 is about the limit of what you can play in terms of years of games on this system, and you're stuck to 720p. So let's go look at some older games to see what it can run in terms of 1080p games. Now let's stick with FPSs for the moment. Here's Alien Isolation running at 1080p on Ultra, and yeah, okay, once again not 60 FPS locked, and the GPU is maxed out, but we're getting an average in the high 40s, low 50s, which is playable for this kind of game. It's not massively fast paced at the most of the time, so Alien Isolation can be played on its highest setting at 1080p on this machine. Of course you can knock a few settings down and probably get a smooth 60, but with Alien Isolation there's not a massive amount of wiggle room regarding optimization. Now here's Tomb Raider, the rebooted version from I think 2013 was it. As you can see, it's running okay. This is 1080p on medium. We're not getting that solid 60 FPS, but we're sitting around about the 50s, which isn't too bad. You can of course obviously adjust it down to low or go 720p to get that smooth 60 FPS. But overall, this is more than playable, and since the console version, depending which console it was, ran at 30 FPS, this game is certainly playable at these kind of speeds. Granted, it gets a bit fast paced at times, but most of the game, 90% of it, it's much slower pace, so perfectly playable at 50 FPS average. Now something a little different. This is obviously a new game. This is Sam Max Save the World, the remastered version, and it runs okay. You're getting around about the 40-50 FPS mark. Once again, perfectly playable for a game like this. It is on low, but if you buy this version you also have access to the original version, which obviously runs absolutely fine on this machine. So you're not completely locked out of brand new games. It's just you can't go for the very 3D intense type stuff.
Oops. No, wait, I mean... Smart move, Sam. You played him like a $2 glockenspiel.
I learned all my best tactics in the first grade.
I tried to send you semaphore signals with my ears, but you know how I always get the K and the V mixed up.
You crack me up, little buddy.
Here's another example of that. Here is Felsil Arbiters Mark in 2019, running at 1080p on its maximum settings, and as you can see, solid 60 FPS throughout. This game is actually capped at 60 FPS, so no issues running a game like this, which isn't a surprise with its 2D-like graphics. As you probably worked out by now, stuff of a certain age runs just fine. Here's Portal 2. Running on, I believe, the highest settings and at 1080p. No problem at all. We get an average of around about 100 FPS, which is absolutely fine. So games of this age and pretty much anything in the Source engine will run fine. As you will see here with Half-Life 2. Once again, very high frame rate, no issues at all. Once again, these are much older games. Not that that's a problem, you can still have fun with them, but it just shows the limitations of this machine. But you're not completely out of choice when it comes to games. So there we have it really. It's a nice little machine, gets a bit loud, gets a bit hot. But if you limit to what you play, around about, 2015 is around about the limit. 2016 and stuff like that, you have to go 720p. So anything older than that, half of the decade, you're absolutely fine. You can run it 1080, normally on medium settings or higher, and you can have a lot of fun with it. It's a nice little small machine, pulls about 77 watts at full load, which is absolutely great. So it's a nice low power machine, but I will say there's not much point in buying one because they go for around about £400 at the moment, pretty much bare bones, which is ridiculous. That's how much I paid for it in 2017. You're much better off buying a gaming laptop from that era, which costs the same price. So it's a bit of an oddball, but if you're after a small machine that can run Windows Server, this can certainly do that. If you're after a small machine that can run games, you're better off getting a gaming laptop. Though, if you get one of these and still have one lying around, you can still have a lot of fun with it. I'm going to look at it again for older games to see what it can do, XP era and some emulation, so stay tuned for that. But until the next video, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Might be 2 weeks for the next one because I'm having a bit of scheduling issues, but nothing too serious. So hopefully next week, the week after, we'll have a new video. So until then, goodbye.